You won't believe what happened when I started working as a nurse at St. James Hospital, an old institution in a small town in the United States. It was the kind of place everyone whispered about, where locals warned each other. Never go there at night. I should have listened, but I was too eager to kickstart my nursing career. The excitement pulsed through me as I arrived for my first night shift, but as soon as I stepped inside, that excitement morphed into something darker. The air felt heavy, almost thick with an unseen weight. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced along the stark white walls of the corridor. I could hear the low hum of the overhead lights, but there was something unsettling about it, like the hospital itself was breathing. When I approached the reception desk, the middle-aged man behind it looked up at me, his eyes sunken and tired, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Good luck, Anna," he said with a forced smile, but I could see the worry etched on his face. As I walked down the hallway to the nurse's station, I felt a chill creep up my spine. The faint sounds of distant beeping machines filled the silence, but there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself that I was here to help people. But as I settled into my duties, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. During my rounds, I encountered patients who seemed to be in another world, lost in their own thoughts or in pain. The first one I approached was Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who had been admitted with a severe respiratory condition. His eyes were sunken and distant, but every time I checked his vitals, I could swear he was trying to communicate something important. It was unsettling. And then, just as I was leaving his room, I heard it, a soft whisper, like a breeze brushing against my ear. "Help me." It sent chills down my spine. I turned around, convinced someone else was in the room, but it was just Mr. Thompson, his gaze fixated on the ceiling. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I was just exhausted, but the feeling of unease lingered. As the night wore on, I noticed something strange about the way the other nurses moved. They were efficient, but there was a tension in their movements, as if they were all aware of something I wasn't. I caught snippets of their conversations, hushed whispers about past shifts and patients who had vanished without explanation. "You know what happened to the night staff last month, right?" one of them said, but her voice trailed off when she noticed me listening. I tried to brush it off as hospital gossip, but as I made my rounds, the whispers grew louder in my mind. Something was wrong at St. James, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked into a nightmare I wasn't prepared for. With every passing hour, the shadows seemed to grow longer, creeping closer, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Little did I know that this was just the beginning, and the real horror was yet to come. The first few nights at St. James were a blur of patients, procedures, and that ever-present feeling of dread that hung in the air like a thick fog. I threw myself into my work, hoping that the busyness would drown out the whispers that echoed in my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, those voices crept back, wrapping around my thoughts like tendrils of smoke. On my second night, the atmosphere felt even heavier. As I made my rounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The fluorescent lights above flickered ominously, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. I paused outside a patient's room, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Inside lay Mr. Thompson, still in his bed, his frail body barely rising and falling with each shallow breath. But as I approached him, a chill ran down my spine. His eyes were open, but they didn't seem to see me. Instead, they were fixed on something just beyond my shoulder. "Mr. Thompson?" I called softly, but he didn't respond. Instead, his mouth moved, forming words that didn't quite reach my ears. I leaned in closer, trying to catch what he was saying. "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. I shivered. "What do you need, Mr. Thompson? I'm here to help you." But the more I spoke, the more distant he seemed, as if my voice was just another sound fading into the void of the hospital. Suddenly, I heard it again, the whisper, "Help me." It was louder now, coming from somewhere deep within the room, but when I turned around, nothing was there. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, as if they were reaching out for me. I backed away slowly, feeling a knot of fear twist in my stomach. As I moved to leave, I caught sight of a family picture on the bedside table. A younger Mr. Thompson laughing with a woman who must have been his wife. But now, in the Stark room, he looked like a ghost of himself. I felt a surge of sadness wash over me. I had to find a way to help him, but I didn't know how. That night, the whispers didn't fade. They grew louder, echoing down the empty corridors. They need us. We're still here. I could feel my heart race, thumping wildly against my chest. As I moved from room to room, the sense of unease grew, enveloping me like a thick blanket. I noticed that the other nurses were becoming more withdrawn, exchanging nervous glances when they thought no one was watching. In the break room, I overheard two nurses talking in hushed tones. "You remember what happened to that poor guy in room 12? They say he just vanished," one said, her voice trembling. The other nurse shushed her, glancing around nervously. "Don't talk about it. You know how this place is. We shouldn't draw attention." What did she mean by this place? A sense of foreboding crept over me. I felt as if I were being pulled into a web, tangled in something sinister that I couldn't quite see. As my shift dragged on, the atmosphere grew heavier, almost suffocating. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone or something to be lurking just out of sight. The lights flickered again, plunging the hallway into darkness for a brief moment. When they came back on, I thought I saw a shadow dart down the corridor, disappearing around a corner. My heart raced and I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But the only response was silence. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted both mentally and physically. As I walked to my car, the oppressive weight of the hospital clung to me, a reminder that I was entering a world of darkness that I didn't understand. I had signed up to help people, but it felt like I was stepping into a nightmare. Little did I know, the true terror was just beginning, and soon I would be facing more than just whispers in the dark. The third night at St. James Hospital felt like stepping deeper into a nightmare. I arrived with an uneasy knot in my stomach, the echoes of those whispers still haunting my thoughts. As I walked through the sliding glass doors, the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, casting an unsettling glow that seemed to amplify the shadows lurking in the corners. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the dread that clung to me like a second skin. My first stop was the nurse's station, where I found the night shift crew huddled together, their voices low and tense. They glanced up as I approached, their expressions a mix of concern and something darker. Fear, maybe. "Hey, Anna," one of the nurses said, her tone forced as she tried to sound cheerful. "Ready for another night?" "Yeah, I guess," I replied, though my heart wasn't in it. I could sense that something was off, and I was determined to uncover the truth. As I gathered my chart for the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a trap, the walls closing in around me. My rounds began, and I made my way to Mr. Thompson's room first. He was still there, looking frail and pale under the harsh lighting. As I checked his vitals, I noticed he seemed more alert than before. "Mr. Thompson," I said softly, trying to engage him. "Can you hear me?" His eyes flickered to mine, and for a moment, it felt as if he was fighting to break through whatever fog was surrounding him. "Help me," he whispered again, but this time there was an urgency in his voice. "They're coming for us." "What do you mean?" I pressed, leaning closer. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to thicken, and a chill swept through the air. "Room 13, he gasped, his voice barely audible. "Don't go there, they want you there waiting." Before I could respond, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat. When they returned, Mr. Thompson looked as though he had aged years in mere seconds, his eyes wide with fear. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Determined to confront the mystery of room 13, I moved cautiously through the halls, my footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. As I approached the door marked with the ominous number, I felt a wave of cold wash over me. The air crackled with a sense of dread, as if the room itself was alive, waiting. After searching the nurse's station for a key, I finally found it tucked away in a drawer, neglected and dusty. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling over the doorknob. The whispers had returned, swirling around me, urging me to turn back. But my curiosity and fear were stronger than my instincts. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. A musty odor hit me, and I stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a single bed in the corner, draped in a stained white sheet. As I approached, I could feel the temperature drop, sending shivers down my spine. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and I whirled around, panic gripping my chest. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. But there was no answer, just the oppressive darkness closing in. My heart raced as I turned back to the bed. The sheet was moving slightly, as if something beneath it was breathing. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pulled the sheet away. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was nothing but an empty mattress, yet the feeling of being watched intensified. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears with desperate pleas. "Help us, we're still here." They surrounded me, suffocating me with their intensity. I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, the room was filled with shadows, swirling and twisting, as if they were alive. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my ears. "What do you want?" I shouted, the fear overwhelming me. But the shadows only continued to dance, moving closer, their whispers transforming into anguished cries. In that moment, I realized I was not alone. The spirits of the lost patients were there, trapped in this nightmarish realm, and they were reaching out for help. "We need to escape," they whispered, their voices blending into a cacophony of despair. Just as I was about to flee, the door swung open, and one of the other nurses stood there, eyes wide with shock. "What are you doing in here?" she gasped, pulling me out of the room. I stumbled into the hallway, breathless and terrified. The whispers faded as I looked back at the door, knowing that whatever lay behind it was not finished with me. The weight of the hospital felt heavier than ever, and I knew I had uncovered something dark and twisted, something that would haunt me long after my shift ended. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was now a part of this story, trapped in a cycle of fear and darkness that would only continue to tighten its grip. The days that followed felt like I was living in a waking nightmare, each shift at St. James Hospital blurring into the next. I couldn't shake the images of room 13 from my mind, the empty bed, the shadows, the whispers of the lost souls. I began to dread returning to work, knowing that with each passing night, the weight of the hospital's darkness was becoming a part of me. On my fourth night, I walked through the sliding doors with a heavy heart, feeling as if I were walking into a lion's den. The nurse's station was unusually quiet, the atmosphere thick with tension. As I grabbed my chart for the evening, I noticed the other nurses exchanging uneasy glances. They were whispering, but the moment I approached, their conversation ceased. It was as if they were guarding secrets that threatened to consume them. "Have you heard about the patient in room 7? One of them finally asked, her voice low. "He's been saying strange things, talking about shadows and the experiments." The word experiments sent a chill down my spine. I had heard snippets of that word during my shifts, but I hadn't fully grasped its implications until now. "What experiments?" I pressed, my heart racing. The nurse shook her head, glancing over her shoulder as if the walls had ears. "They say the hospital was involved in something dark years ago, things they never should have done. Patients just vanished." I felt my stomach twist into knots. What kind of place was I working in? My thoughts turned to Mr. Thompson, the desperation in his eyes. I had to learn more, not just for myself, but for all the patients trapped in that dark abyss. Determined, I made my way back to the nurse's station and pulled up the hospital's records on the ancient computer. I scrolled through endless files, searching for anything that might shed light on the whispers and shadows. Hours passed, and just as fatigue was setting in, I stumbled upon a series of incident reports from years ago. My heart raced as I read. The reports detailed a range of unethical experiments conducted on patients without their consent, some involving isolation, others about enhancing their mental and physical states. I could barely process the implications when I noticed a familiar name. Dr. Isaac Reynolds, the former head physician who had mysteriously disappeared alongside several patients. I felt a surge of dread. Was he still here? Was he the one behind the whispers? As I absorbed the information, I glanced at the clock and realized I had missed my rounds. Panic surged through me. I had to check on Mr. Thompson. I hurried down the dimly lit hallways, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and every shadow seemed to watch me as I passed. When I reached his room, I found the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, only to find it empty. My heart sank. "Mr. Thompson?" I called, but there was no answer. The bed was made neatly, and the four stands stood untouched. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The whispers returned, more insistent this time, swirling around me like a storm. "Help us, help us." I stepped back, feeling a panic rise within me. Had he been taken? I needed to find answers, but the shadows in the hallway felt alive, curling and creeping closer with every second I hesitated. I turned to leave when suddenly the lights flickered and dimmed. The air chilled, and I could see my breath forming misty clouds. The whispers escalated into anguished cries, echoing in the small room. "We need you. You must help us." I stumbled out into the corridor, my heart pounding. As I raced back toward the nurse's station, I collided with one of the other nurses, Sarah, who looked as frightened as I felt. "Did you see him?" she gasped. "Mr. Thompson? He's gone." "What do you mean gone?" I replied, my voice shaking. "They said he was moved to a different unit, but I don't know, Anna. Something feels wrong." The sense of impending doom enveloped us both. "We need to find out where they took him," I insisted. "We have to understand what's happening here." But as we started to move toward the exit, the lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness for a moment. When they returned, the hallway felt different. The shadows had thickened, forming dark figures that loomed ominously at the edges of our vision. "Stay close," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. We moved cautiously, trying to navigate through the labyrinth of despair that the hospital had become. But with each step, the shadows pressed in, whispering promises of secrets best left uncovered. In that moment, I knew we were about to uncover something far more terrifying than we ever imagined. The truth about St. James Hospital was waiting just beneath the surface, and it was hungry. The oppressive weight of fear hung in the air as Sarah and I navigated the dimly lit corridors of St. James Hospital. Every flicker of the lights sent my heart racing, each shadow seeming to pulse with malevolent energy. We moved in silence, our breaths shallow, our eyes scanning for any sign of Mr. Thompson, or the darkness that loomed just beyond our perception. As we reached the nurse's station, I noticed a hastily scribbled note on the bulletin board. "Mr. Thompson, transferred to Unit B." The words felt like a slap in the face, and I could feel my heart sink. What did it mean to be transferred in this hospital? My instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. "Unit B?" I murmured, turning to Sarah. "What do we know about that place?" She hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I've heard rumors. It's not a regular ward. They say it's where they keep the patients they want to forget. It's isolated and the staff there is different. We shouldn't go there." The thought sent chills down my spine. "But we have to find Mr. Thompson. If he's there, we need to know what's really happening in this hospital." With determination, we made our way toward the back of the building, where Unit B was located. The hallway leading there felt like a descent into darkness. The walls were lined with faded photographs of past patients, their smiles frozen in time. It felt like they were watching us as we moved deeper into the abyss. When we reached the door to Unit B, it loomed before us like a portal to another world. The metal was cold beneath my fingertips, and I could hear faint noises inside, muffled voices that seemed to echo off the walls. I glanced at Sarah, who looked just as terrified as I felt. "We can't turn back now," I said, swallowing hard. "We need to know the truth." Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and we stepped inside. The atmosphere was immediately different, heavier, almost suffocating. The lighting was dim, and the walls were painted a sickly shade of green, which only amplified the oppressive feeling in the air. As we entered, the muffled voices grew clearer, becoming a cacophony of cries and whispers. "Help us, we're still here." It was as if the walls themselves were alive, echoing the pain of the forgotten. We walked down the corridor, and the shadows seemed to stretch in contract, whispering secrets just out of reach. The doorways on either side were barred, the glass windows clouded, preventing us from seeing inside. I could feel my heart pounding louder with each step, the atmosphere thick with despair. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash from one of the rooms, followed by a series of frantic screams. My pulse quickened as I exchanged a glance with Sarah. "We have to see what's happening," I insisted, my voice trembling. We rushed toward the source of the commotion, our feet echoing in the eerie silence that surrounded us. As we reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob. "What if it's a trap?" Sarah whispered, fear creeping into her voice. But the screams were growing louder, filled with desperation. I pushed the door open, and the sight that greeted us sent my stomach plummeting. Inside, a group of staff members in dark uniforms surrounded a patient who was thrashing wildly on the floor. His eyes were wild, and he screamed as though he were trapped in a waking nightmare. "Please, let me go," he cried, but the staff held him down, their expressions impassive, as if they were accustomed to this chaos. "Get away from him," I shouted, stepping into the room, adrenaline surging through me. One of the staff members turned toward me, their face a mask of indifference. "You shouldn't be in here. This is for the patients who can't be controlled." "But he needs help," I pleaded, feeling a surge of anger. "What are you doing to him?" "Just administering treatment," the staff member replied flatly, but I could see the glint of something darker in their eyes. Before I could respond, the patient caught sight of us, his expression shifting from fear to desperate hope. "Please help me. They're experimenting on us." The weight of his words crashed over me like a wave. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're testing something horrible. We're not just patients. We're their subjects." His voice cracked with fear, and I could see the pain etched on his face. Just then, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment. When they returned, I felt a chill sweep through the air. The staff members had vanished, leaving only the terrified patient on the floor. "Where did they go?" Sarah asked, looking around in confusion. "I don't know, but we need to get him out of here," I replied, my heart racing. As we helped the patient to his feet, he looked at us with wide, frightened eyes. "You have to hurry. They'll come back, and it won't just be me they want. They're coming for you too." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The truth was far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. We weren't just uncovering a secret. We were stepping into a trap that could ensnare us all. With renewed urgency, we led the patient toward the door, but as we stepped out into the corridor, the oppressive atmosphere grew thicker, shadows closing in around us. The whispers returned, rising into a frantic chorus. Help us escape." The darkness was coming for us, and the reality of our situation sank in like a stone. We were caught in a web of horror that we couldn't escape, and the true nightmare of St. James Hospital was only just beginning to unfold. The air in Unit B felt charged with fear as we fled from the chaos of the patient's room, dragging the terrified man with us. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears, and the whispers of the lost grew louder, urging us forward. "They're coming!" the patient gasped, his eyes darting around as if the shadows themselves were alive, hungry for our panic. Who's coming?" I asked, my voice trembling as we hurried down the dim corridor. The staff, they don't like it when we talk. They'll do anything to silence us. His words sent chills down my spine. We needed to escape before we were caught in their web of darkness. As we navigated the narrow hallways, the oppressive atmosphere pressed in on us. I glanced back, half expecting to see the staff members emerging from the shadows. But all I saw were the flickering lights above us, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to twist and morph into grotesque shapes. "Where's the exit?" Sarah asked, her breath quickening. "Just up ahead," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But as we approached the door marked emergency exit, I hesitated. A sudden sense of dread washed over me, and I could feel the shadows closing in. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the hallway, followed by frantic footsteps. "They're here," the patient shouted, his eyes wide with terror. "We have to move now," I urged, pushing open the emergency door. The metal creaked ominously as we stepped into the stairwell, the dim light barely illuminating our path. The air was stale and cold, wrapping around us like a shroud. We descended quickly, the echo of our footsteps bouncing off the concrete walls. My heart raced as I thought of what awaited us if we didn't escape. "We have to get to the main floor," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "Wait," Sarah whispered, her eyes darting around. "Did you hear that?" I strained to listen, and my stomach dropped as I caught the faint sound of voices rising from above, a mix of anger and urgency. "They've escaped! Find them!" Panic surged through me. "We need to hurry." I pushed forward, racing down the stairs, my heart pounding in sync with the sound of our fleeing footsteps. Each step felt heavier, as if the darkness was reaching out to pull us back into its depths. As we reached the ground floor, I spotted a door that led to the outside world. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "There! That door!" I pointed, and we rushed toward it. But as we reached for the handle, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway behind us. "They're coming!" the patient yelled, and I could see the fear etched in his features. "Quick, open the door!" I shouted, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the handle. It felt like an eternity, but finally it clicked and the door swung open. We burst outside, breathing in the crisp night air, but our relief was short-lived. The parking lot was shrouded in darkness, the dim lights flickering overhead like dying stars. I looked around frantically, searching for a way to escape. "We need to get to my car," I urged, scanning for the familiar shape of my vehicle. But just as we took a few steps, a shadow moved at the edge of the lot, and I froze. "What was that?" I whispered, my breath hitching in my throat. Before I could react, the shadows coalesced, forming the silhouettes of the staff members we had encountered before. "There they are," one of them shouted, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing the patient's arm and sprinting toward my car. The sound of pounding footsteps followed us, and my heart raced faster than my legs could carry me. We reached my car just as I fumbled for my keys, the cold metal slipping from my fingers. "Hurry," Sarah urged, her voice filled with panic as the figures closed in behind us. Finally, I got the door open, and we tumbled inside. I turned the ignition, praying that it would start. The engine sputtered, and I felt a surge of dread. Come on," I pleaded, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. With one final turn of the key, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into gear, peeling out of the parking lot. I could see the staff members standing in the shadows, their expressions a mix of anger and frustration as we sped away. "Where do we go?" Sarah gasped, glancing back as we drove through the night. The darkness of the hospital faded in the rearview mirror, but I knew that whatever we had uncovered was far from over. "I don't know," I admitted, trying to focus on the road ahead. "But we have to figure out what's really happening at St. James. If we don't, they'll come for us, just like they did for the others." As we drove deeper into the night, The weight of our discovery loomed over us. The whispers of the lost echoed in my mind, and I knew that we had only scratched the surface of the horror that lay within St. James Hospital. The true nightmare was waiting, and we were now part of its story. We drove through the darkened streets, the city lights blurring past like fleeting memories. My mind raced with thoughts of what we had witnessed at St. James Hospital. The shadows, the screams, and the desperate pleas for help. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a lead blanket, making it hard to breathe. "Where do we go now?" Sarah finally asked, her voice trembling as she peered out the window, the streetlights flickering across her pale face. I don't know," I admitted, my heart pounding in my chest. "But we can't go home. They'll find us." The reality of our situation settled like a stone in my stomach. We were fugitives from a nightmare, and I felt the darkness of the hospital still clinging to me as if it were trying to pull me back. I turned onto a side street, hoping to lose the shadows that seemed to stalk us. We drove in silence for a while, both of us lost in our thoughts. I glanced at the patient who sat in the back seat, his face pale and drawn. He looked more fragile than ever, a ghost of the man he once was. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "Ethan," he replied softly, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't think I'd ever get out of there." His eyes were haunted, filled with the kind of fear that no one should ever have to experience. "We'll figure this out, Ethan," I promised, but I felt a flicker of doubt. I had no idea what we were up against. After driving for what felt like an eternity, I pulled into a deserted gas station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. "Let's stop here," I said, wanting to gather my thoughts and figure out our next move. We got out of the car, the cold night air biting at our skin. I could feel my heart pounding as I scanned the area, looking for any sign of danger. "We should find a phone," Sarah suggested. "We need to call the police or someone who can help us." "Do you really think they'll believe us?" I replied, doubt creeping into my voice. What if they're in on it? What if they're part of the experiment? Ethan shuddered at my words, and I could see the fear in his eyes. I don't want to go back there," he murmured. "They'll know we escaped." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly. "Okay, we'll figure it out. Let's see if we can find a landline or maybe a payphone." We moved cautiously toward the entrance of the gas station. The door creaked open, and a wave of stale air hit us. Inside, the dim lighting revealed a few shelves stocked with snacks and drinks, but the place felt abandoned, as if time had stopped. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. I felt a sense of foreboding wash over me, a nagging feeling that we were being watched. We moved toward the back, where I spotted an ancient payphone. "There," I pointed, relief flooding through me. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something strange. A dark stain on the floor, leading away from the phone. "What's that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing as I knelt to examine it. The stain was thick and dark, a stark contrast against the faded tile. It looked like blood. Ethan's face went pale. "We need to get out of here," he urged, his voice trembling. Just then, the door swung open, and a figure stepped inside. A man in a worn jacket, his face obscured by a hood. My heart sank as he turned to us, revealing a sinister smile. "Looking for help, are we? Who are you?" I demanded, stepping protectively in front of Ethan and Sarah. "Just a concerned citizen," he said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "You really shouldn't be out here. It's not safe." "Get away from us," I warned, my pulse quickening. The man took a step closer, and I could see something glinting in his hand, a knife. Now, there's no need for violence," he sneered, but his eyes were cold, devoid of any humanity. "You've stumbled into something you don't understand. St. James Hospital, it's a place where secrets are kept, and you've uncovered too much." Panic surged through me. "What do you want?" I asked, backing away slowly. I want you to come back. You see, you're all part of something much larger than yourselves. You were chosen, he said, his voice dripping with menace. And now you've made it personal. Before I could react, he lunged toward us. I shoved Sarah and Ethan aside, instinctively throwing myself into the path of his attack. The knife grazed my arm, pain exploding through me. I cried out, stumbling back, blood spilling from the wound. "Run!" I shouted, urgency coursing through me. Ethan grabbed Sarah's hand and they darted for the exit. I quickly regained my footing and followed, adrenaline fueling my escape. As we burst through the door, I could hear the man's laughter echoing behind us, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Get to the car," I yelled, pain throbbing in my arm. We scrambled toward my vehicle, my heart racing as I fumbled for the keys. Just as we reached the car, I could see the man emerging from the gas station, his eyes wild with rage. "You can't escape," he shouted, but I didn't look back. I jumped into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys as my hands shook. "Hurry," Sarah urged, her voice filled with panic. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into gear. We tore out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. I could see the man in the rear-view mirror, his figure growing smaller as we sped away. But even as we put distance between us and the gas station, I felt a gnawing dread in my gut. The darkness of St. James was far from over, and now we were caught in a deadly game we couldn't escape. The true horror of our situation loomed ahead, and I knew we had to confront it head-on. The night wore on as we sped through the deserted streets, the glow of city lights fading into the rear-view mirror. My heart raced, but the pain in my arm was a constant reminder of how close we had come to a nightmare. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky, glancing back nervously as if expecting the man to emerge from the shadows. "We need to get somewhere safe," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Somewhere we can think and regroup." "Like where?" Ethan asked from the back seat, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe my sister's place. She lives on the outskirts of town, away from the chaos," I suggested, my mind racing. "She won't believe our story, but at least we'll have a moment to breathe and figure out our next steps." As I navigated the winding streets, the weight of everything we had experienced pressed heavily on me. The whispers from St. James still echoed in my mind, their haunting cries intertwining with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Do you think they'll come after us?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Honestly, I don't know," I admitted, glancing at Ethan in the rearview mirror. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear, and it dawned on me that we weren't just running from the hospital. We were being hunted by something much darker. After what felt like an eternity, we reached my sister's neighborhood. The street was quiet, lined with trees that loomed like silent sentinels in the night. I pulled into the driveway, my heart racing with both relief and dread. "Stay quiet," I whispered, glancing around before we exited the car. "We don't want to draw any attention." We slipped into the house through the back door, trying to keep the noise to a minimum. The familiar scent of my sister's home enveloped me, a bittersweet reminder of normalcy. But the warmth felt foreign in light of the horrors we had just escaped. Once inside, I quickly locked the door and led Sarah and Ethan to the living room. The soft glow of a lamp illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the walls. "We need to figure out what to do next," I said, feeling the weight of my words. "Maybe we should call the police," Sarah suggested, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "They need to know about St. James and what's happening there. Do you think they'll believe us?" I replied, rubbing my temples in frustration. "What if they're in on it too? We can't risk it." Ethan spoke up, his voice shaky but determined. "We can't just sit here. We have to gather evidence. Something concrete that can prove what we saw." "Like what?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. "Like the records from the hospital," Ethan said. "If we can find documentation of the experiments, maybe we can show someone who will listen." My heart raced at the thought. You're right. If we can get back into St. James and find the files, we might stand a chance. But the idea of returning to that place sent a shiver down my spine. It's going to be dangerous, I warned. They'll be on high alert after our escape. We don't have a choice, Ethan insisted. If we don't act now, they'll come for us, and it won't just be us in danger. After a moment of tense silence, I nodded, steeling myself. Okay, we'll go back, but we have to be smart about it. As we made our plans, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. Maybe we could expose the horrors of St. James. Maybe we could save others from the fate we had narrowly escaped. The night dragged on as we formulated our strategy, our resolve strengthening with each passing moment. We decided to return at dawn when the shadows were still thick, hoping to use them to our advantage. When the first light of day broke, we gathered our things, flashlights, gloves, anything that could help us in our quest for evidence. Are you ready? I asked, looking at Sarah and Ethan, who both nodded, their faces set with determination. As we pulled into the parking lot of St. James, a chill settled over me, reminiscent of the fear I had felt during our first encounter. The hospital loomed before us, a fortress of shadows, but I refused to let fear consume me. Stick together, I instructed, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on us. We entered through a side door that we had discovered during our previous escape. The air was thick and stale, the silence almost deafening. Each step echoed in the empty halls, and the memories of our previous nightmarish encounter flooded back. We navigated the dim corridors, adrenaline pumping through our veins. Where do we start? Sarah whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Let's head to the records room. It's down this way, I said, trying to remember the layout from the night we escaped. As we approached the records room, my heart raced. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open slowly, revealing a dimly lit room filled with file cabinets. This is it, I said, stepping inside cautiously. We fanned out, searching for anything that could help us. My hands shook as I rifled through the papers. Each file I opened revealing more about the hospital's dark past. Experiments, disappearances, names of patients lost to time. Look at this, Ethan called, holding up a thick folder. It's a log of patients who were admitted for experimental procedures. I hurried over, my heart pounding as I scanned the pages. This is it. We need to get copies of this. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, and our hearts dropped. They're here, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Quick, hide, I urged, and we ducked behind the nearest file cabinet just as the door swung open. The staff members stepped inside, their voices low but urgent. They couldn't have gotten far. We need to find them before they expose everything. I held my breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. They were so close, and I could hear their muffled voices growing louder as they searched the room. Let's move, I whispered, motioning for Sarah and Ethan to follow me out the back door. We crept silently, hearts racing, but as we slipped out into the hallway, the shadows around us seemed to thicken, wrapping around us like a dark shroud. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the corridor into darkness. Panic surged through me. This way, I shouted, trying to guide them through the maze of shadows. We sprinted toward the emergency exit, the echoes of our footsteps mingling with the shouts of the staff behind us. They're getting away, one of them yelled, the urgency in their voice sending adrenaline coursing through my veins. We burst through the emergency door and into the open air, sprinting for my car. Get in, I shouted, fumbling with the keys as the darkness chased us. As we jumped into the vehicle, I could see the staff members emerging from the building, their eyes wide with fury. Go, 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 Sarah urged, and I slammed the car into gear, speeding out of the lot. The weight of our discovery pressed down on me, but now we had proof. We were armed with evidence of the horrors that had taken place within those walls, and I felt a sense of determination swell within me. As we drove away from St. James, I glanced back at the ominous building receding into the distance. "We did it," Ethan breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. "No," I replied, my heart still racing. "This is just the beginning. We need to get this to someone who can help us." As we sped away, the shadows of St. James faded into the horizon, but I knew the fight wasn't over. The darkness may have lost this round, but it was still out there, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. We had uncovered a horrifying truth, and now we had to ensure that the world would know. And deep down, I understood that we had become a part of something much larger, an unrelenting battle against the darkness that lurked within St. James Hospital and the countless others like it. We were no longer just survivors. We were warriors against the shadows, and we wouldn't rest until the truth was exposed.